I came to doing the Fringe show because I had a story to tell. I enjoyed theater, but it wasn't because of the theater part, it's because of the story that needed telling somewhere, somehow, to somebody. So the frustrating part has been the sense of call to tell the story, but never knowing for sure what it is I'm supposed to be telling. That made it all kind of branch out. Am I telling a story so that survivors of Hitler Youth know that people are aware of them as unsung victims? Am I telling the story because I was in marriage counseling for 3 years and no psychologist had any idea that this was an important part that would have affected our marriage? Or am I telling it because kids are manipulated and don't know that they are? So I'm still not sure. I just hope that there's a certain message for each person that they come away and struggle with, and it helps them wherever they are on their journey.
Theater is perhaps not the most usual way that people convey a message they really want to get out. Can you say a bit about your experience with theater?
I majored in speech in college. I had a part in the senior class play. In high school, I had 3 lines. One was "yeah," and the other one was "yeah," and the third one was "yeah." So it was very easy to memorize. And then when I majored in speech, covered the gamut of drama, theater, debate, spontaneous, extemporaneous speaking, and ended up more toward the debate field than in the theater field, though I was having enough credits to get into National Collegiate Players. After that, except for clowning around with the children, I probably didn't do much in the way of any kind of theater until I was in ministry, and once in a while I would play a person as my sermon, like Mrs. Job, or the woman at the Last Supper who did all the waiting on the men, or something like that. So I would create something and do that. Beyond that, I think it was 2 years ago, I was part of the Pretty Good Players when they were in the Fringe Festival, and I was involved with them a couple of years before that. That is a group that has older people writing funny scripts about getting old to make other older people laugh. So that one was fun.
Another dimension of your story is ministry. Can you say a little bit about how you came to ministry and how you worked as a minister?
I think God has a sense of humor. There's a retreat place in the Cascade Mountains in Washington called Holden Village. Have you ever heard of it?
Oh, many times.
You have.
It's a standing topic of conversation. Most recently, just a week ago, it changes lives. What was your experience with Holden Village?
That became our vacation place. I've probably been there 20-some times. But that's where the idea of ministry was first planted. And the way that happened was that the pastor for the village always invites somebody to help him out. So there I am standing at the altar wearing this robe and doing this thing. And afterwards, some women came up to me and said, "Oh, it's so nice to see a woman in ministry. It's just wonderful." And I'm going, no, not me. I was just helping Dan out. but somehow the idea got put in my head, connected with me. That was the year that we were there all year long. So when spring came, it was time to go back home. I had a Volkswagen bus and one daughter that had stayed there, was having a wonderful school experience. Ran across two people on the boat who had traveled up that far by Greyhound by the bus and lived near me. She said, well, come ride with me. So they did. They were like, I don't know, half mile off my route, maybe 3/4 of a mile, just absolutely nothing. So I took the first one home and she said, oh, well, I want to give you something for gas. I said, it doesn't cost much gas to go half a mile. She said, I'll give you something. So she gave me something and I put it in my pocket. And her friend did exactly the same thing and I put it in the other pocket. Okay, that's jumping ahead a little bit. Now go back as we're coming down from the boat dock and we end up going along the Columbia River when it's quite small yet. And I'm thinking, because my home life at this point was really chaotic. My husband had taken early retirement because it was either this or maybe not a job next year, and with this you get a severance, and he was a German whose value to himself, I think, was in hard work, and all of a sudden there's nothing. Kids were getting older. I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom forever. So I'm thinking about all of these things, and at the moment the top possibility was becoming a tour guide. And I thought, well, that would be kind of fun. And so I'm thinking this, and then all of a sudden, bang, the seminary pops in my head. I was like, what? And I look out at the river, and there's a double rainbow over the river. So it goes around like this, and it was a sunny day, so it was reflected. So I have these two rainbows out there. And I'm saying, this is really getting pretty sappy here. But the idea wouldn't let go of me, or I wouldn't let go of it. I'm not sure which way it went. So then I did this little bit with the riders that I had, and the idea was still nagging at me. So my daughter and I stopped at our favorite place for hamburgers. And I remembered the story of Martin Luther being caught in a storm under a tree, a very bad storm, where he began to fear for his life. Prayed to St. Anne if she would save him, then he wouldn't become a lawyer, he'd become a monk. So I thought, well, if he could do that sort of thing, maybe I could too. So we're sitting there, and I thought, all right, if this truly is you, God, speaking, when I count my money, there's going to be enough in there to make up for what the woman didn't pay me when I gave her a ride to Minneapolis. She wanted a ride back and forth. And enough for the gas for today. And I thought that was pretty far-fetched, but I pulled everything out and I counted it. Had enough left over for lunch. So that's all it took for me to take it seriously. And then went home and told my husband, who I had no idea really what he would say, but he thought that would be a wonderful thing, because then he would be Mr. Pastor. In Germany, there's Herr Pastor, the minister, and Frau Pastor, the minister's wife. So he would have an elevated status along, right with me. So I started doing the jump through the hoop stuff, and within a month, I was attending classes at a Roman Catholic Benedictine monastery out west. Accepted here by Luther so that they could let me in the class with the men out there.
And how was your seminary experience? What was it like?
out there it was really fun because it was a small group and surprising things would be happening. And they'd look at me and say, well, how is it in a Lutheran church? And I'd say, well, I don't know, I haven't been there at that seminary yet. Or learning Greek. Every morning the brother wanted us to start off saying something in Greek because he thought the language was so beautiful. And so if we learned to speak the language, and then it would be a wonderful discovery when we know what we're saying. So for half a semester, I said the Hail Mary every morning very faithfully. And then it was interesting to come back here and realize the two different perspectives with these two churches, the way they look at Scripture. At the Catholic seminary, we spent 3 solid weeks doing nothing but researching mystery. And what is mysterious, and what is there we don't know, and how does all this work? And at the Lutheran seminary, it's we know everything. Don't, wait a minute. There's something out here that we don't quite get. So it was just the reverse of the way I'd experienced out there. People-wise, it was great. We made jokes. I was the high priestess, and I had 12 men in my class, so they were the apostles. It was fun.
I guess I want to hear the rest of that strain of the story, if you wouldn't mind. What did you do with your seminary degree? Where did you go with that?
Where did I go with it?
Yeah.
Well, the first year only was out west. And the reason that I could attend there was that everything would be accepted back here. So I did everything the guys did except their faith formation after school things. Actually, that's a very integral part of where it came to my story for the Fringe, probably. One of the young men was probably about 6'3", a great football build, had played football. His assignment for faith formation was working with a woman, visiting her in a hospice program. She was still in her home. She was dying of cancer. One day he went there and she said, there's a devil in the house, and will you get him out? And he's going like, help, what do? I know there's an exorcism rite in the Catholic Church, but they don't do anything unless we prove it's there. I don't have a clue what to do. So he took off his crucifix, and he went around the whole house with this great assurance he had, and he's out, 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 and he herded everything to the front door, and he opened the front door and shooed everything out of the house. And we were all laughing just the way that you were laughing. But then he said the woman was different. She felt the cleanness and the clearness of the home. And the other fellows in the class weren't surprised at that. And I'm sitting there holding my jaw to keep it from falling open, because my history in the Lutheran Church with that sort of thing was words. Give us this day our daily bread, Lord's Prayer, carry on into that, or confirmation class, what we would have to memorize in there. And somehow it made the jump then from the page into our lives. And I became more aware, not of things that I was going to see, but more aware of things I had seen in the past. Like, oh yeah, I saw the bad seed on stage. The story of the little girl that was evil and murdered a man who could say that she was the one who had killed a little boy, and then she killed her mother. I was like, yeah. Oh, and I was in Germany. I saw where Martin Luther threw the ink pot at the devil, a big ink blotch on the wall. There isn't now. All the tourists have picked out the little pieces, so there's no ink left. And thought about the time I'd been in Tanzania, where I was walking with one of the pastors, and I said, "What do you do? What's a typical day? What do you spend most of your time doing?" And he said, "Casting out demons." Like it was, I like coffee. I ate at 6, cast out demons. So all of that, I guess, kind of coalesced together.
So you came back to Lutheran Seminary as a Lutheran who believed in demons.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't quite ready to say that yet. After that swing set accident, it took me about 6 years before I could even really look at it close enough to say, hey, what did happen there?
Just for the benefit of our audience who haven't had the pleasure of seeing the show, without giving much away, this play describes a number of very strange accidents which are attributed in the play to the intentional acts of demons, of the devil. And that's one of the features of the play that a contemporary audience sort of has to come to terms with. That there's a devil in this play. It's taken very seriously. And instructions, careful and clear instructions are given as to what to do if one of these things should bother you. So that was information you gradually came to over a period of 6 years, starting with this exorcism event.
And even then, I thought if you had a cross on it and you held it out, that it would be protective. And so it was a total shock to me to find out that I'm holding these crosses around in my place, and it didn't seem to make any difference. So I struggled with that for a while, and finally came to the realization that the cross, for me now, is a reminder of Jesus' death on the cross. And it isn't that the cross itself has the power, it's that Jesus died to give me the power. And that's how that shift came into understanding that I have some power. Because I think we give Jesus short shrift. You know, oh, he's on the cross for a few hours, which isn't nearly as long as a lot of other people are, and he dies, and that's too bad. And then he's put in the tomb, and he lays there for 3 days and does absolutely nothing. And then the Father comes along and said, "Time's over, get up." And he really hasn't done anything. I think the moment he died and the curtain is torn in two, that he is on the devil's turf, in the devil's realm, carrying on a battle that has infinite meaning for all of us, and that he won that battle. And that's why he was able to give that power to me, so that, well, as M. Scott Peck wrote, People of the Line, Glimpses of the Devil. And he says, this isn't the big stuff we're dealing with, we're doing a mop-up. We're just doing a mop-up action of cleaning up the little stuff. But for us, it's big when we run into a devil. So that's how I see the power working. In the cross then, oh yeah, I've got the power. I've got it.
You became a pastor then after seminary? Is that
I did. It took quite a while. In our church, you're not automatically a pastor when you complete seminary. Your call to being a pastor must be validated by a church out there that says, come and serve us. And only when they do that are you actually ordained. So this was about the time where the Lutherans were merging into a new church, and things were falling through the cracks. I had like one interview in a year, and I couldn't be bitter about it because I didn't know why. Whatever. I was divorced, bad. I was old, bad. I was female, bad. So who knows, you know. And then the swing set accident where I was injured so badly was right after graduation, so I was out of commission for a while too. Probably took about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and I read a job board application at the seminary saying, if you would like to serve as a summer minister, fill-in Montana, just call this phone number. And I thought, any little church that bypasses all the administrative people and the bishops, it just puts out there what they want, deserves to have somebody. So I had to balance that in one hand and a chance to be pastor up at Wilderness Canoe Base in the other. So that was a hard choice. But that's how it got started. Then I was there just for a little while for the summer, and then somebody else out in Montana heard about me, and they wanted me to come there, and then they wanted me to serve as pastor. That was it. Then eventually, not too long actually, I left there. I always felt the call to work with conflict, to a specialized ministry, not just the parish ministry. So along the way, I became arbitrator for the Better Business Bureau and a community mediator for various community organizations, got training in that, and I wanted to put my two loves together. So I did, and then I got to travel around the country, different places.
So at this point, are you retired, or are you still doing that kind of work?
I'm retired. I actually had to retire early because something was going on and I didn't know what was wrong, and the doctors couldn't explain why I was dragging. I was dead tired all the time. I was freezing all the time. And eventually, after I retired, I overheard a TV show, and the woman had the same kind of things, and followed the trail on that one, and I was eventually diagnosed with fibromyalgia. But cold wasn't part of that. And now I know the cold was part of the demonic presence, influence, whatever you want to call it.
So this demonic presence has kind of followed you through your life.
Evidently. My word journal of I have 100 pages, more than 100 pages now, where I've written down the incidents that have happened and exactly what happened and what got hurt. And what I didn't write down was what I was doing with this evil journey at the same time, which would have been interesting, because it's been 2005 is when I started researching Hitler Youth, and that's when these things seem to have come around more intensely and more often.
Well, perhaps that's a piece of the story to fill in for people watching. Again, we're kind of giving the play its own space to speak in its own way and avoiding the details in this interview, but another important dimension of the Fringe show is a discussion of the harm that was done to young men and women in Germany by the initiation rites and educational practices of the Hitler Youth, and how that influence carried on into adulthood to affect their attitudes and their relationships in terrible ways. audience. And again, the play is an attempt, I think, very successful attempt, to give people information about that, to say, you need to know that this happened, and you need to know that this influence carries over in the lives of the substantial number of immigrants who came from Germany to this country after the war. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your research there.
I researched just the Hitler Youth boys. It was very different from the groups for the women, for the young women. They were taught how to raise children to be soldiers, raise boys especially to be soldiers. The boys were taught how to die. And along the way, I think mostly what I read were memoirs, where some person finally had to come to terms with his own involvement in that organization. None of them were written the day after the war was over. There'd be years later before they were able to understand enough that they have given up a good part of their life to something that was wrong, was deadly. There's a woman, Susan Bartoletti, who has written a wonderful book on the Hitler Youth, who has gone around and interviewed people who were members and what their lives are like now. You mentioned earlier the Rose Society. There was a young man who lost his life working in that group. She has interviewed his brother, who is still a staunch Nazi and thinks they did the right thing for all the right reasons. So even, no matter what the experience is, even back then, there's something that changes a man's core, a boy's core, that they just can't get out of, just can't get out of. I feel so sorry for them because nobody knows who is and who isn't. Even in Germany, people are suspect. Were they part of it or were they not? So that means each boy who has grown up has had a very silent and lonely journey because there's no one else to compare notes with, no one else to say, hey, that's from then, that's not from now. So that's a double victimization, I think.
Did you make any public use of what you were learning about the Hitler Youth prior to producing this play? Is this a matter you've spoken about or written about or preached about?
I started off doing research because my husband always said the past is the past, and I didn't know anything about it. I just had no clue because he didn't tell me. And it took, what, I was divorced 87 and I started researching in 05, 18 years before it occurred to me I could just go and look it up myself. I didn't have to wait to be told by him. And so it was our both being at a wedding at the same time and catching up on people we knew, having a little conversation. We were talking about traveling. And he said they never fly because you can't see anything up there. And then he said, they don't know how good they have it here. And I heard that a lot. That was us. But he'd been a naturalized citizen for 45 years. And I guess that was maybe the thrust that said, what is going on that he still says they, like he'd just gotten off the boat. And then I really got into the research. And the first book I looked at was the one that had the little story about Hitler Youth having to bring a pimp to a meeting. And then, at least for some of them, I don't know that it was universal, than having to kill it without showing any remorse. I mean, that's just stomping the whole core of a person into nothing. Into nothing.
I guess the reason I asked about your public statements or public is because you were concerned that, I mean, one of the ways you were understanding the odd things that were happening to you was that some important forces did not want you to tell the truth.
Right, okay, let's go back, because by the time I got through talking, I'd totally forgotten that that was your question.
Okay, thank you.
And that's part of the whole brain injury thing, which is very frustrating for me. I'm a member of Mensa. There's no way I could join that organization now, because I lose things. I lose things out of my head. And friends will say, well, now you're one of us. Well, thanks. I'm not comparing to you, I'm comparing to what I used to be. As the writing began, trying to find out why he had said they and why this was affecting our family and maybe affected our marriage, I started taking notes of all the research I was doing. I ended up with a bibliography of over 100 books. And I thought, well, this needs better writing than I can do. So I started taking classes at the Loft. And then somehow this became little things, enter a contest or send it off to Newsweek for my turn or something. And I think everything came back rejected. Well, they don't come back anymore, they just keep it, you've got your electronic. I don't recall ever really selling anything. But each time that happened, then I learned more about the writing process and what may or may not interest people in the process. So when I took the class at the Loft, the first one, there were some of us who wanted to continue meeting together, working on our project. So I went in with those 7 or 8 people and wrote a manuscript, a 300-page manuscript of what Germany was like, what Hitler Youth was like, what my life was like, and then trying to put it together. Sort of the expansion of what was in the Fringe.
Has that ever been published?
It has not been published, but it's when I had it sent off to a literary agency in California, and they were starting on a second review of it. That's when the incident happened where I was shoved when I was carrying the load of Bibles, and oh, wait a minute, no, that was a different one. That was the one when I was doing Pretty Good Players and ready to go on stage, which was just flat cement, and all of a sudden I was thrown down to the ground, and as I lay on the ground, my pelvis was squeezed until it fractured. I thought I was dying. I didn't know that I could make it. But that was at the same time that my work was being read at the literary agency. And then as I was beginning to heal up, I wrote to them and said, don't ever say this in public. Basically, it was, will you please make up your mind, because I want all this stuff to quit, and if you buy my book, then maybe it'll quit. And I think they must have thought they really had a weird one on the other end, because I got an immediate answer that we're not interested in your book. And I really haven't done anything more with it until, well, it wasn't even the book, but the story, until last fall when I was so frustrated with it doesn't let go of me. If I can get it done, then I'll be left alone, and somebody else will carry on what I've started. So I was doing a lot of praying for direction and talking to people for discernment of what I could do next. And of course my writing group is saying it's good, you need to keep sending it out. why don't you publish it yourself? Well, I'm too lazy to do the footnote referencing that needs to be done. I mean, I know where everything goes, and it probably isn't a lot of work. And if I'd done it over the last 7 years, it'd be all done. But that isn't the way it has worked. I've just put that off. And so when I was thinking about our Fringe experience with the pretty good players, it was kind of fun. Well, maybe I'm supposed to do a Fringe thing. It's just a lottery. Throw your name in there. And then if you don't get it, fine, at least you offered to do that. Instead, I got a slot. And then it was like, yikes, what am I going to do with this? Because I didn't have anything planned out of what I was going to do with it. And then it sort of morphed into, I don't know what I'm doing, help me. And I'd get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, something in my head, and I'd start typing it out. And I felt a kinship with Matthew, Mark, Luther, and John. Well, this is how it is. You sit down, you put yourself, you show up. That's what you do. You just show up. And then something helps you put something down. And then the people around you did that one in the middle of the night, or whatever, they started tweaking things, and it flowed. And I knew, first it was going to be a one-woman play, so I got in touch with a wonderful storyteller. And I knew about her because I'm on the storytelling list as well. But she sounded like, oh, that's perfect. That's what I'll do. And so I hired her, and she went through my script and talked about what would work for storytelling and what wouldn't work for storytelling. And then as I thought about it, I thought, how am I ever going to do the Rolf character by myself? You throw a hat on and talk this way, and take the hat off and talk this way, and it just didn't feel right. So that's when I started interviewing friends, or casually asking them, do you know of anyone who is a playwright that could maybe not teach me because there's too much to learn, but help me? I give them the information, they shape it. And a person from church was able to suggest the playwright that I ended up with, Jamie Meyer, and I wrote the script. We sat together and we talked about it. He got a feel for what I was thinking and what I was doing. He's a wonderful listener. And then 2 more scripts, he would go through it and change things around and make suggestions. And after the 3rd one, that's when we had what I used for the Fringe, pretty much. I had changed some things. He kept saying, it's my story, it's my script. And it is.
And then were there changes in the course of rehearsal also? I know you had a very fast rehearsal, a very quick rehearsal period.
Well, he's my 3rd Rolf.
Yes.
It's not the first one. So I've had rehearsals along with other people. If you're part of a writer's group, you change it every time you look at it. Because you go away and you think, oh, that was terrible, this would be better. And you go and you change it to that. So one of the first things that Jack did when I started working with him, he says, you're freezing the script. I said, what do you mean? He said, no more changes. So that day in the afternoon, I get a message from one of my writer friends, and he said, this might be better right here. He had changed. I said, no more changes. That's it, I'm done with changing.
So I've had the privilege of interviewing Jack, talking a little bit about kind of his career in theater as an amateur, as a long-time amateur, going back to 1958.
His first play was done, I figured out, when my last play was done, 1958.
Wow.
So it's odd.
So how was it working with another, with a collaborator over a short period, working with Jack to put this thing together in a week?
Well, we didn't really collaborate. I mean, I had the script, and he had all these other things that I didn't know anything about, that he would ask about, and I say, no, I don't have that. Okay, I'll take care of it. So it was more a job division, where I had this part and he had that part.
What a piece of luck to get all of this coming together.
I don't think it's luck. I think God has been with this thing. I think God has been with this thing as far back as World War II. Because I look back and certainly with Jack coming in, calling me and wanting to be part of it, my saying, no, I have somebody now, and then having hesitation about how that's working. I can always go back and do it as a storyteller, but I really liked the idea that Jamie had with the two people. So I could always go back, but I really wanted this to work, so pulled him in. But questions would come up. Why did I marry this man in the first place? And why did I stay married? Yeah, but why did I marry him in the first place? Obviously, it was not a good thing for me. And as I looked back at that, I thought, I was what he needed. So maybe that's why I married him, because it felt like God's will at the time. And I go back all the way, and there's a place in the script that Rolf says, and I can still see him when he said that to me. We went down in the cellar, and I prayed the Lord's Prayer, and all the oxygen is taken out of the air. And I'm saying, oh, why was that? I had no clue. And we came up, and the house here had a direct hit, and that other neighbor on the other side had a direct hit. And I think about that. How can a house be between two bombed out houses, not have any damage, and those are total rubble? Something other than luck was at work there. And then the day that we went, that I went with the church young people, the young adult group, to Devil's Lake State Park. And I have this thing going with the carpool driver, with Vern, and I'm all excited about going swimming with him. I go down there and I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and it doesn't come out in the play. The reason that he never showed up is that the car trunk key was missing, and he couldn't find it anywhere. He looked 3 hours for it. So how did that come to be missing so that I meet this person? And I wonder, is this some sort of grand plan? I don't know. I don't know that much about how God works, but it seemed like a grand plan in my life.
And so the play is partly a matter of trying to make some guesses about, what the plan might be.
Well, actually, all that wasn't in the play because I don't know. I don't know. But it was part of my thinking as I wrote the play, and I would try to sort it out. That's no clue. That's a fanciful way of looking at things. It's like my degree was in speech and psychology. So I look at all kinds of weird stuff from the psychological area first. And I think, oh, that's right, there's something else that could be considered. So when you're looking at your own story and you read into it, that's how you understand things. I tried to keep that speculation out of the play.
But is it fair to say that the writing of the play was an occasion for rethinking kind of what this all meant?
Right. And fortunately, because of the divorce, I had reams of paper and notes and the history written down, the narrative written down. Because we don't remember that well anymore. I found some things I thought, oh, I'll write it down, I'm sure that's what it is. And then I go and look, wait a minute, this says this says that, oh, I should change, no, this is the right one. And so I have to rework what I had thought I remembered. It's an amazing process.
Wow. And in a way, not an uncommon process at the Fringe. I mean, this isn't the first interview I've had with people who have done one solo Fringe show, which was an attempt to come to terms with
Whatever.
some big reality in their lives.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things, I think, about what the Fringe does for people.
I don't know that it came out in the play. There's so much stuff in it. But I hoped that all of my story was just that, just my story. And you have your story. And she has her story. And I think God and evil are butting heads in all of our lives in some way. Some of us are lucky and it's not enough to even notice. But others are saying, oh, I did that show and I didn't think this was going to work. Everything just flowed. When I started with my show, I thought, I've got the clincher in the beginning. It's this 10-minute short that Walt Disney made that is so perfect in introducing someone to Hitler Youth. The world belongs to the brutal, the strong. The rabbit's a coward, deserves to die. Well, Disney wouldn't give me permission. So I couldn't use it. So I had to come up with the other. But everyone has their own, I think, working. I don't know if anyone caught on, there was one of the slides, do you remember seeing the word good?
No.
The word good is up there, and the cutouts that make the letters were E-V-I-L. So you've got good and evil at the same time in the same place, working with the same people. So then the trick is, so what about that? Why is God doing that? So I've come to decide, for me anyway, the understanding is that the Holy Spirit is aware of what's going to happen, and in my life intervenes, so that my job is to listen. Watch out. I don't go, oh, are the birds singing? Watch out. I look up, and if I hadn't done that, I'd be dead. That's how close it was. It was just like the doctor said, it was like I'd been hit on the head with a pile driver. I've walked down streets where I will sense, I shouldn't go down this way. And I will turn around and walk away. And I'll look back and I'll see someone come out of a doorway. Or in one case in Texas, it was 3 guys crossing the street. And they just turned around and went back where they came from. So I think that listening skill is there for everybody. And I'm not saying Christian or whoever, because in my mind, we're all God's people, and the Holy Spirit is doing that, whether you're a church member, church believer, atheist, Muslim, Jewish person, or whatever, that power is there.
This play has been pretty successful at Fringe, as Fringe pieces are. Where might you go next with it, or what might happen next with this piece?
What might happen next was a question in my head some time ago. One of my writing group people really was talking against using the title of Hitler, Satan, and me, because they envisioned skinheads coming out. And I read about things that happen to people in our society when they are different from everybody else. And it was real tempting to just become afraid. Do I create a new email address? Do I let anybody know where I live? I'm not going to tell my neighbors that I'm in the Fringe. Or should I get a different telephone number? I mean, I'm anticipating all the stuff that just kills off our joy in life when we start being so afraid. From the time I was up at Holden until now, it's still on my cupboard door, is what we call the Holden Prayer. And when I would get most afraid, I would go and I would read that. And it says, "O Lord God, who has called thy servants to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, along paths untrodden, through perils unknown, give us faith to go out with good courage, not knowing whither we go, but only that thy hand is leading us and thy love surrounding us." And so then I could let go. And the play had just a little bit of that, because I thank the Holy Spirit for good courage. So then I can think more rationally about, well, where should this go? Should I copyright this? Or should I put it out there even? Well, then I've got other people to think about. I've got family to think about. Do I want to do it again? Am I called to do it again? No, let God take care of that. And what I've come to hope is true, is that in the presenting here at the Fringe, there's going to be maybe one person each show, maybe just one person that is going to be so caught, so encaptured by this, that they will sort of, like a relay race, take the baton, and I can get off the track and they can go with it. They can go with it.
Do you think that this project, this play, this research is going to kind of end up defining your life? Or, I mean, can you imagine sitting down tomorrow and writing a Fringe play for next season on something else? Moving on?
Well, I hadn't thought about that.
But is it possible?
But I'd like to stay back in with the writing group and do some things. I have so many stories and so many sermon illustrations that are fun things. You know, people forget sermons, but they usually remember the illustrations. And then I'm tired, and then I think, realistically, it shocked Jack when I said something. Because my brain loses stuff, and he didn't have enough time to memorize. He worked out this system of putting the whole script on a series of slides, like a PowerPoint presentation, so they would just go. And he was very kind in saying, "Well, I know you're planning on using a paper script. What do you think about this?" I said, "Well, I won't know until we try it." So he got it done, and we're doing it. And I thought, oh, that's really great. If anything happens to me before the Fringe is over, somebody can come in and just read it off. I mean, that's how my thinking goes. I might die. I might be incapacitated. I might have something that keeps me from doing this. And he just kind of looked at me. He said, "Well, you can think it, but don't say that." But that's the way I think now. And so it's kind of a surprise each day for the Fringe that I'm still upright and able to go in and able to do it. And maybe next Monday something bad will happen. But I think, I say in the play, I think that, or maybe it's on the program, that to get rid of evil, you notice it, you name it, and you neutralize it. And I have done all the noticing, and I have done all the naming. And I think in doing the play, I'm doing the neutralizing. So I think I'm going to be fine and everything will be good. But maybe not. We'll wait and see. see. It's another path that'll be untrodden, probably.
Well, I guess what impresses me about this play is your clear desire to be helpful to people. It comes through, and it comes through in other places too. I mean, it's the way the Fringe is valuable in Minnesota is that people actually want to do other people some good. They want to give them advice or explain how to get out of some scrape they got into. Or in your case, if you happen to beat a demon, here's what you do.
But again, it's not, I mean, I love people. I find them fascinating, and I love interviewing people. But I have to not take that much credit for wanting to help everybody. But it's more that God has given me something that God once said. And I try not to say, well, that isn't important or that is important. Just if my sense is that is the information or the feeling or emotion that God seems to want to express, then I try to do that.
So, in some ways, the preacher's role, the minister's role, you're still in that.
I hope not too much, because that first script that I took to Jamie, he was also very kind. He said, well, when people go to hear something, there's analyzing, and there's preaching, and then there's what people want to hear. And I tended to concentrate on what the preacher does, and that isn't always heard by folks.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that's a problem you confronted in your preaching, too.
Yeah.
That's how the drama got into your preaching.
Yeah, it did.
Well, I wish I could have heard those sermons.
I even have a letter from Elie Wiesel, because I wrote, he came here to Minneapolis many years ago and did a presentation, and in his presenting, he made this rash statement of, why doesn't anybody ever write about Mrs. Job? If you want to do that, I'll be your sponsor or creator or something like that, editor. Anyway, I sent off a letter and said, that's what I want to do, is write something on Mrs. Job. And he wrote back. And I did write on Mrs. Job, and I sent it off to him, and his secretary took care of it. But I guess what I'm saying with that little story is, you don't know what you're going to do, and support for the idea comes from the strangest, surprising places.